Hey folks, Rob Flux here for yet another Sunday session, and today's topic is all about the 7 biggest mistakes you can make when you're lodging your development approvals. And in order to help us with that, we have the fabulous Jessica Reynolds from Urban Planning Queensland. How are you, Jessica?
I'm good, thank you.
Should give you some details so people know how and where to find you. So 7 big mistakes. We're going to go through quite a bit of ground in there. They range from, I guess, emotional mistakes to rookie mistakes to just plain planning mistakes. So excited to hear what we've got to hear over the next hour or so. Before we go too far, I guess, who is Jessica? I guess tell us a little bit about Urban Planners Queensland and why we should be listening to you today.
Oh, who is Jessica? Where do we start? We could be sitting here for the whole 40 minutes. No. So I'm an urban planner. I started in the industry well over a decade ago, and I started Urban Planners Queensland 7 years ago. So I've been in business for 7 years. We specifically service small to medium projects in Queensland. So that's our niche, that's where we're at, and that's what we do. It's something I absolutely love doing. And yeah, I look forward to doing it for maybe another 10 years. Or more.
But having said that, the topics that we're going to cover today are clearly going to be applicable Australia-wide. We have a national audience, so we're going to try and keep it with that broad flavour. After all, there are 537 different councils around the country, so I guess 537 different ways of doing the exact same thing is kind of how I like to think of it.
100%. And like all these 7 mistakes that we see are things that happen nationwide. So whilst we're in Queensland, we talk to enough people to know that this is common.
Absolutely. And you also run your own podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast and how long that's been running.
So I started the Creating Australia podcast in 2018, and it was there to humanize the development industry. We all know companies, brands, projects, but there are people behind these. And I think that gets really lost sometimes. And, that's what we see in the newspapers and in the media and in all the rhetoric that is really anti-developer. But really, there's a lot of people out there trying to do good things and wanting to do good work. And so, yeah, I interview people from around Australia in the property and development industry and get to know their career stories, who they are and what they want to do.
Don't necessarily need to name someone, but what's the most valuable lesson or thing that you learned in running that podcast and interviewing other people?
Interviewing people is that there is a really common thing where even I get it. I've talked to you about this before. You get nervous before you put something out there in the world. Everyone, no matter if they're the most famous, best in their industry, everybody gets nervous. Everybody has a fear of judgment, and some more than others.
Well, we're going to be perfect today, so don't you worry. Won't make any mistakes at all. Even if we do, we'll just leave it up there for eternity. So don't feel bad. That's
perfect mistakes.
Perfect mistakes. So 7 biggest mistakes. Now we were chatting about some of these just offline a little bit, but first one, taking advice from questionable sources. So give us some insights into that.
Oh my goodness. And I'm sure you as, holding the property developer network, you have seen this a lot where, you might be doing a project, you've never done this project before, and you go and ask everyone about what you should do. That is honestly probably one of the worst things you could do because you don't know what that person's experience is. You don't know if they've been working with the same council as you, the same state, even in some cases the same country. I love following your Facebook pages, and I see, in the group chats, people asking, hey, what if I do X, Y, Z, with no context at all as to where that location is, what advice they've received previously, yet putting it out to the world. And, as lovely as everyone is, everyone jumps in and tries to help, but is that advice something you should actually be taking on board because you haven't given enough context to actually get the advice back that you need?
Well, I think we touched on it before, 537 different councils. And so if you don't say, hey, I'm doing it in this council and I'm doing this exact thing, then you're going to get advice from well-intentioned people, but they come from another council with another set of rules and, and it's not it's not just my network that is guilty of that. It's pretty much all of the property groups out there. It's, I guess, a number of different sources where well-meaning individuals might accidentally be giving you a bum steer.
100%. And I was not saying it was just PDN. It was just saying that I personally follow those pages, so I see it. I know that a lot of other people are making this mistake. And it's not even just through asking other developers and other property professionals and not giving them the context. It's about taking advice from, one of the big things I've been advocating against clients doing at the moment and others around Australia is stop asking your brother's sister's neighbor what you should do. We're seeing a lot of, questionable decisions being made based on purely just, I heard this, I heard that, with no research to back it up or professional opinion. So it's a hard.
And I was, by pure coincidence, was having this exact chat with a brand spanking new member to our community on Saturday, the first time that they attended. They'd come from another community and came to us and they went, oh, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And I went, well, what council, what zone, what? And I went, you can't do that there. And they went, well, but I was told that I could. And, they were about to make a horrible mistake in buying a $1 million+ property that you go, wow, how do people make those, get some good advice, get some, pay the experts to do the exact thing, and get an expert in the council that you're doing. There are many fantastic town planners out there, but they only specialise in certain areas. So you touched on where you specialise in. There's going to be other town planners that specialise in other areas. Get someone who's actually solid at that particular spot.
Yes, don't ask me about anything that's happening in Sydney or Melbourne. I will flatly refuse.
Very good.
We're definitely seeing it. Oh, we're talking over each other now. This is typical. Two extroverts.
Ladies first.
Well, I was just going to give an example of, even where you think somebody might have qualifications and experience to back up that advice. I received a phone call this past week from someone who has been around property development for a long time. They have a lot of experience, and they actually called me to check the advice that they gave to another property developer. And I just blatantly said, no, you're incorrect. But they thankfully at least had the ability to go, hey, I'm going to check this advice that I just gave. But imagine how much that does happen and they don't check.
Well, I would imagine that's a fair rarity inside the industry to call another town planner and say, hey, I'm not quite sure I gave the right expertise. So kudos to that person for reaching out. And I guess kudos for you for, allowing that to happen. So we want to be fostering a very good community and symbiotic in between businesses. So well done.
Yeah, definitely.
So problem number 2, seven biggest mistakes. Mistake number 2, getting emotional. Now, I've seen this many, many times, but as a town planner, I'm sure you would have seen a bucket load of people that are, I guess, emotionally invested in the outcome of what they're trying to put through.
Definitely. And I very much understand, especially when there is a reason behind it. You're putting a lot of money into something, you're putting a lot of effort into something. But at the end of the day, it's a business transaction. And I'm actually shocked at the amount of people who have cried on the phone, not by cause of bad town planning, but just by cause of the process and the stresses that do come about through property development. If it was easy, everybody would do it. They don't. So it does need to be treated as a business transaction, because again, once you get emotional, just like asking the wrong person for advice, if you're asking the emotional person in your head to make decisions, it's probably not going to end well.
Well, and being a business, transaction, you need to treat it like a business. So you need to, the same way that you would study to do a university career or that sort of thing, you need to invest in yourself to actually train yourself to go, well, am I actually looking at the right property in the first place? And make sure that you can then bring qualified leads to your town planner, as opposed to, hey, I just think that this can happen because I saw somebody down the road do it.
If only I could name some names. I'm sure they're listening right now. They are getting better, but yes, that is definitely a common thing we see, is people getting excited. That's also like a bit of an emotional thing of excitement, going, I think I can do this, but again, not backing it up with research or learning and teaching yourself when you should actually pick up that excitement. I love excited developers, but we've got limited time.
Well, we're not. I mean, we're not emotionally cold creatures. We can have a range of emotions, but you want it to be this wide, not this wide, and make sure that you can temper that and celebrate the deals that you actually lock in early when you lock them in. Great and that sort of thing. So I think emotions are good. We don't want to be robots here, but yes, absolutely. I guess treat it like a business, not a hobby. Yeah.
No, I don't want to see robots. Again, back to the podcast, another plug, but it was about humanizing it. So I do love the human aspect. I love working with people. We all love working with people. Most of us are relationship type people, especially in the property development game. And yeah, you want that, but you don't want to be taking people on a roller coaster ride.
No. So, biggest mistake number 3, JV partnerships with no head of state.
Oh, this is probably one of my favorite things to get, I guess, talking about emotion, upset about. Not necessarily upset, it's probably not the best word, but I am definitely seeing some great things, a lot of joint ventures, a lot of people partnering up, whether that's with other property developers, with the property owners, and no one can seem to choose who the head of state is. So everybody's wanting to be accommodating and, oh, like, what do you think? But at the end of the day, with any project, you need one head of state. You need that one person who can take control, make the decisions, and everybody on your project team knows that that is the person to talk to, if no one else. It works so much better because, yeah, what we're seeing with a lot of joint ventures is it's amazing to see people come together, but how does it just doesn't set you up for a good project management.
No, and I would say the whole point of a joint venture relationship is that one person should be strong where the other person is weak, and therefore you should be complementing each other. And so, if two of you are strong in one department, then that is an opportunity for conflict. And if two of you are weak in that same department, then that's an opportunity for it to just go round and round in circles. So make really clear, I guess, your awareness of your skills of both parties. Understand how you interact with each other. Make sure you know each other's personality types, that sort of thing. There needs to be a casting vote. If a JV has two people, if they have a difference of opinion, there needs to be a casting vote. And who's going to have that casting vote?
That's awesome advice. And I think also about consistency through the project. So I've seen people take on that management at the start, and as soon as something goes wrong, let's just say council say, no, sorry, you can't have 4 stories, we're knocking you down to 3. They then change who that head of state is. So that can get a little bit confusing for the team. So make sure whoever you're choosing, they can, roll with those punches and keep things going.
Yeah. And I know, especially very early on in people's development career, they tend to do a lot of joint ventures because they want someone to go along for the ride with them and feel like there's a level of comfort and have somebody sitting over their shoulder. So joint ventures are really common, and until you start to get further and further into the process, and you get your own, you get your training wheels off, and then people tend to want to do it for themselves. But in those early days, probably the biggest challenge that I see is that 2 developers get together. And it's not one money partner and a developer, right? It's 2 developers, and then both of them want to make the decisions, and both of them kind of, oh yeah, we'll just talk it through. It'll be okay, and invariably it's not okay. I like to think of it this way. If we look at statistics, 50% of all marriages fail, and that's when 2 people love each other. So imagine what happens when there's 2 people getting together and there's money involved, right? So it's a recipe for disaster if you don't get it right.
Oh my goodness. Have any good examples? Any good stories, Rob?
Oh, there are a lot of good stories, but nothing I can put to air, Jessica. Yeah, none at all. Okay, so next one. So number 4, not having a development assessment strategy. Now, firstly, let's talk about what is a development assessment strategy, because a lot of people are going to go, well, I don't have one because I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, so it's nothing specific. It's nothing crazy. There's no document you need. It's just about having an understanding of how you want to process your application through council. So that's an agreement between you and your consultant team. So it's about communicating your overall project strategy and then incorporating that into the development assessment strategy. So we all know we all want everything done as quick as possible, as cheap as possible. I think that's it. Quick, cheap. That's it.
No, quality.
Oh, and quality. Sorry. Yeah, I forgot that one.
You can
Not a
have
reflection of me.
you can have any one of the two, but you can't have all three. You've got
Yeah.
to choose which one you want.
So we all know that. So when you have your overall your project, some people, you might be wanting to hold on to this project. You want to get your development approval, and you're going to hold on to it for the next 3 years. Or you might be wanting to, get this project in and out as quick as possible. So other things might lag. You might not get the quality that you want. The quality being the product you want when it comes to town planning. So let's just say you really want 3 lots. 2 lots might be really easy, but the 3 lots might be harder. So that's your quality there as far as yield. So your town planner and your consultant team need to really understand that that's your strategy so that they can incorporate that into their development assessment strategy. So let's just say you were of the option of you need the quality, you need the yield more than the time. You've had to choose from that 3 triangle of quality, time, and money. So we don't, in a lot of cases, there's fast tracking systems in Queensland, and I'm sure there are throughout the whole of Australia, but we don't necessarily say that that's the best option for somebody who's going to sit on the land for the next, 2 or 3 years, because you might not actually get the yield. You need that room to negotiate. And a lot of those fast track systems, they don't let you negotiate. So that's where I'm talking about. You need a bit of a strategy. Your team needs to understand your overall strategy, and then they can incorporate it into the development assessment process and then give you better advice to get you the outcomes you really want.
Especially if you're trying to push the boundaries. So if you're, if the rules say you can only get X and you're trying to get X plus 1, right, or 2, or whatever, and you're trying to push the boundaries, then how your professionals lodge their application with regards to what are the arguments they put in, what are the, because quite often if you want X plus 1, you'll actually ask for X plus 2 and then yield a bit and look like you've actually given in. So you want to make sure that everybody's on board with that exact same, structure and argument, and make sure that it's actually defendable, and that, by the time you look with your town planner and your architect and your civil engineer and your surveyor and you get the team, they're all going to be telling the same story.
Yeah, definitely. That consistency makes the project run like a dream.
Absolutely. With one person making all the decisions in
Yes.
all of that, which is why, looping back to the previous one, why one head of state is really important, because if you've got one person talking to one consultant and a different person talking to another consultant, it can actually get really, really messy. So, because that consistency doesn't come through.
No, I've personally experienced it. And as somebody who has been in the industry for, about a decade, I'm pretty experienced with these things, but it definitely makes our job a lot harder when we're getting advice from one head of state and then someone else and then someone else, and then trying to go, hey, but you said this, so what are we actually doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Next one, no engagement with the community. So now I could prattle on for this one for ages, but what are your insights in that regard?
Look, I think proper engagement with the community is something that I debate. It can be done well and it could be done badly. So this is one of those ones where I personally would take, with a grain of salt. So I'd, projects definitely go better when you have a good relationship with your neighbors and your community. That's not even for if you have to publicly notify to the public. Even if you don't have to do that, we're living in a world where your neighbor and your community have access and know when you're lodging an application. They can see all the information. They can see what you can do. there is a lot of transparency now. So if you're not acting with transparency and with good intentions for your community, and you don't get, again, back to communication, if you haven't communicated that to your neighbors and your community, you might be setting yourself up for a whole world of pain. Again, it's about proper engagement would be the thing. Don't go there and go, hey, I'm doing this. Nobody ever responds to that well. We all know that. No one likes being told, I'm doing this. I just thought I'd let you know. That's not engagement. That's just telling someone what you're doing. And that doesn't have, that's not a good dialogue to open with.
Well, there's a couple of elements to this. I think there's times when, and each council's jurisdiction has a slightly different approach on this, but there are times when you're lodging an application and there's a mandatory element where you have to actually go and notify all your neighbours. And there are other councils and other types of application where you don't need to mandatorily do that. And so if you know that there's going to be a mandatory approach where you're going to have to tell the neighbours, you want to start getting on the front foot on that well before you've actually lodged the application and well before it's actually, a finished product, and start to engage really early. Now, for me, for those that have been hanging around me for quite a while, they know that I tend to turn up to my neighbours with a bottle of red and a bottle of white, right? And I go, well, I'm your new neighbour. I don't know what you drink, but either way, I'm leaving here and one of these is going to be empty, right? And you get to know them as a person, understand what their issues and challenges are, and then somewhere in the conversation, you determine whether or not it's the right time to actually raise it. Are you going to raise that straight away? Is it in a month's time? You want to start to prepare. How do I actually let my neighbour know that I'm actually doing these things? Am I Rob the friendly next door neighbour, or am I Rob the evil developer, right? And so having that trust and rapport with your neighbours is really, really important. But it's not just the neighbours. The community is, I guess, the surrounding area as well. But neighbours, absolutely. If you've got a letter of support from your neighbour, then that's going to outweigh a complaint from 3 streets away.
Oh, definitely. And we're even seeing specifically, I know, again, it's Australia-wide, but in Brisbane, we're even seeing the local council, even though it's not legislated that you need your neighbours' consent in some instances, they are actually asking it for them to sign off on a project. So it's a lot easier when you actually have a good relationship. But what would you do, Rob, if the person you live next door to is a bit of a nutter? Would you still engage?
I would still engage, absolutely. And I would seek their input with regards to what the application actually looks like. Mm-hmm. I'd need to set expectations correctly to say, look, I'm going to take your input and I'm going to do what I can to accommodate, but sometimes I can't accommodate everything. And it's really important that you have that expectation right, because if you, go there under the pretense of you're going to do what they want, and then you don't, then you actually aggravate them even further. So it's look, I want to listen, I want to do what I can, but there's constraints that I need to comply with there. But if I can accommodate you, I absolutely will.
Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to interrogate you on your own session, but how would you go about when you introduce yourself? Do you go straight up, I'm a property developer?
I generally don't lead with that. No, I generally say, hi, I'm Rob, I've just purchased next door and that sort of thing. Would like to know a little bit about yourselves and, the community and how long you've been here and, what are the things that are happening and, the vibrancy in the street and that sort of thing. Generally, if you can ask them questions and get them talking, then you don't have to talk as much. And then what will happen is they'll actually reveal the bits of information that you need to then go down the rabbit holes that you need at the right point in time. The best way to have a conversation is ask a question, not tell them your opinion.
Yeah, definitely. So just basically do what Jess just did and turn it back on the other person and keep asking questions until they realize.
So there's a concept called the 5 whys, Jessica. Have you heard of the 5 whys?
Oh, like the why? No, I haven't actually.
Okay, so you ask a question and they come back with a response, and then you ask a secondary question about that response. So why is that important to you? And then they'll go down, and give a little bit more detail about the issue. And you go, well, so why is that important to you? And when you go 5 layers deep, and you ask a question about the question about the question about the question, you usually get to the core of the issue as to actually what's actually sitting underneath. So it's a concept called the 5 whys. I encourage everyone, if you're trying to get to build a relationship with people, that you actually start to do that and start to listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. And I guess the reason why this is important is, and this is a term that we hear a lot in the development industry, is a term called the NIMBYs, right? So not in my backyard. Now, there are going to be people who are anti-development, no matter what you do, and you try really hard to engage with them. You try really hard to listen to them, but no matter what you do, they're going to be very anti that. So where I come across those sorts of people, and they do from time to time, I try to very gently remind them that they are actually living in a property that at some point in time somebody developed, right? If we go way back in time, 220 odd years ago, Australia was a 1-lot land subdivision. And every house that we live in, every road that we travel on, every school that we go to, every shop that we go to was a property developer looking at the needs of the community. And so what we really want to try and do is, what if we can understand when we're talking to them, what is their need, not today, but in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years time, to go, oh, when you're actually getting older, you want to age in place. Wouldn't it be nice if you had something to age in place with? Right, those sorts of things. And you want to make sure that when you understand their problem, you can actually give it back to them in a way that actually solves the problem. But factual, but it solves a problem they don't even know they have yet. Yes.
No.
There you go. Sorry, you got a fly or something?
Yeah, it's coming for the light. No, I'm like, oh, great. If there's a giant fly on the screen, it's not actually giant.
It's not a giant. Okay, next one. Getting approvals that can't be built.
Yes. So this is something that you can probably speak to more than I, but it's definitely something that we see quite often, is that, again, that excitement's there, the project's starting, maybe haven't got the right advice from the right people, there hasn't been a head of state, the decisions have been all over the place, and all of a sudden you get a development approval and it's never built because it's just not commercially viable, or it just maybe can't physically be built. And yeah, like that's a huge issue.
Well, where that really comes down to, and it's not thinking big picture about the end goal of what you're trying to do with the development itself. Where it really comes down to is council is going to really care about the footprint of what you're actually putting on the property. Okay, so I guess, where are the walls? What do they look like? That sort of thing. But then you've got to actually construct that. So there's an engineering level of detail that needs to go in that comes well after council have approved. Now, council will tell you, did you comply with the rules? They won't tell you, is it commercially viable? That's not their problem, right? Their problem is whether or not it's going to upset the community and whether or not it's actually going to fit in the surrounding areas. So you want to make sure that, look, the thing that you're building doesn't need to be over-engineered, hasn't got massive amounts of retaining walls or huge amounts of fill or, foundations that need to go to the Earth's core, that sort of thing, and make sure that the product that is actually going in there is actually suitable for purpose. So is it going to meet the community needs? Is there going to be demand for that finished product? A whole bunch of stuff. It's uncanny how many people don't actually look at the demographics of the area and go, well, the area is looking for X kind of product, but I'm going to go build Y because that's what I know how to do.
Yeah, again, it's a business transaction, and you would never go and start a business without doing proper due diligence and making sure that there's a market there, that you can actually be profitable. It's the same thing.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact stats on this, and I wish I had have looked it up prior to this call, but the number of development applications that council approve that never get constructed is just uncanny. I would, I guess, anecdotally think that it's probably 60% plus that get approved and never constructed, which is there's a a fair indication that people aren't thinking all the way through. They're not looking at either the commercial viability or can they actually cash flow that to the end.
Yeah, like there's always going to be that, that level of or that percentage that just, you get to the end and you just couldn't foresee it. There's things that happened. Maybe the council didn't give you the development approval that you needed to make it happen, but ultimately you need to understand that up front.
Absolutely, which then loops us all the way back to where we were starting at the front, engaging with your whole team start to finish to make sure that everyone's looking at the project end to end as to what it's actually going to be, so they can actually do the full feasibility on it. So your architect, your town planner, your civil engineers, your builder, everyone needs to be looking at this and going, well, yes, it's a great design, but if you move the sewer this way, then you'll be able to extend the room out. If you don't have that cantilever, it'll be a lot cheaper to construct. All those sorts of elements that, you can add sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to a project by making minor tweaks on lines on a page.
Yeah, and it's always a lot nicer to have those clean plans that were DA approved rather than having to go back and change those later.
Yeah, well, changing plans, what's the process for that? A lot of people get someone else's DA and they want to potentially change what's there. I know that there's a couple of different mechanisms and processes. So there's a concept called generally in accordance. So how does that work, Jessica?
Yeah, so for Queensland, this is more Queensland specific. So there is generally in accordance. So generally in accordance, if you have to ask if the plans are generally in accordance, that's when I normally say, well, they probably aren't. So that's about saying that you have your DA approval, you have your conditions, and you might change like the location of a window a little bit somewhere, and you would say that's generally in accordance. It's not on a 10 townhouse development, it's not really going to be an issue. But if, say, you're adding a whole new 2 bedrooms to that, which council have assessed, or your car parking, things like that, and you're going to me or to your town planner saying, is this generally in accordance? The fact that you have to ask probably indicates that it's not generally in accordance. You need a change application.
Good to note. And I guess are their time limits? So that what's the mechanism there for that timeline? Because quite often people are getting DAs that are 2 years old when they're buying existing sites.
Yeah, so it depends on the type of permit that you have got. So there's different, and especially nationwide, there is a difference with the currency period for every application. So as long as your approval is current under your state legislation, that information will be on your approval documents, or you can just contact your planner or your local government and they'll be able to confirm that through your development approval documentation. And then as long as it's current, you can go and apply for those change applications.
Very good. Now, next one, timing and expectations.
This was one that I really am glad that you let me put in, because it's a pet peeve of mine. Timing and expectations, we can easily say, you come to me and you say, look, Jess, I need to get this project through, what's an estimate of time? And I can say, look, council really have 6 months to approve this, but generally we're getting them within, a 1 month, 2 month period. But you as the project manager need to understand, like costs, like everything else, there can be blowouts. It could be quicker or it could be slower. And my non-favorite thing is, getting those phone calls consistently in the day going, why hasn't it been done? Really, you're dealing with government. You have no control unless you're very well connected. We have no control. The legislation sets the timeframes, so they are allowed to extend. There are a lot of, throughout the nation, there is a lot of, you can move timeframes. They don't have to get things done on a certain time because, we said 2 months ago it would be done. The other thing to remember is it's
statutory timelines is what it's referred to.
Yeah, I could use technical terms, but sometimes. And the other thing is to understand where the world is at the time. That's really, in the past 2 years, it's been really interesting to see property developer attitudes to the development assessment process, their expectations around timing, When the pandemic first started, everyone was calling me saying, "Oh, council will be pushing everything through, won't they? They'll be pushing." But as we all know, and what played out was that we in the property development sector got busier than ever. Property prices went up and not down. Nobody expected this. And what's happening now is councils, there's a skill shortage. We're seeing it worldwide. Everyone's talking about, resignations, people not wanting to work, people changing jobs. People are burnt out. There is a skill shortage. Most people are already at capacity as far as businesses and government goes. So timeframes now, that plays into it. So timeframes are not, the timeframes you got maybe 2 years ago are not the timeframes of today. So we're even seeing it, again, going back to the council fast track system in Queensland and specific councils. It used to be 5 business days. They've had to change it to 10 business days. That's a doubling the normal time frame that we had 2 years ago. People just can't meet them now.
Well, and it varies from council to council. Now, we're quite fortunate, I guess, here in Southeast Queensland, limited number of councils and one very, very large council. So, the timelines are pretty consistent. But somewhere like Sydney and Melbourne, Sydney's got 35-inch councils. Melbourne's got somewhere in the similar vicinity just for the Melbourne region. You can be council number 1 and they might get their approvals through in 4 months, and the next council next door, they might be a 9 or a 12-month timeline. So it's about understanding those timelines, being realistic with those timelines, not putting undue pressure on council themselves, because then they're not going to like you, and making sure you factor those into your holding costs, that you factor that into how you're actually dealing with your consultants, and you're not putting unreasonable pressure on them, a whole bunch of things that sit in there.
Yeah, or yourself. We don't want people having heart attacks or, issues because of stress, because, we, at the start said, or you're relying on information from 2-3 years ago and not realizing that those timeframes are actually blown out now.
Yeah. And now I mentioned that the technical term statutory timelines, that's, I guess, what council is meant to legally comply with, right? It's also important to know that whilst they're meant to legally comply with it, if they can't, generally they'll actually ask for a time extension, and it's not like you've got a lot of choice. They ask as if they're really begging for forgiveness, but if you say no, they pretty much go, "Oh, okay, we don't have time. We'll just refuse it." So it's recognizing that at times council themselves have a lot of work on. They need those timelines to get things done. And whilst we want that decision fast, we can't put a lot of pressure on them, and we don't have as much control as it might on the surface appear.
100%. And that's the thing. Again, you got to remember you're dealing with people. I've always been an advocate for being respectful of government employees. And, sometimes, like anyone on any team, sometimes you need to push some people a little bit harder than others. But really, you are just dealing with people. Calling, harassing people, abusing people is definitely not how we play. And I don't think it's a good way, especially as a town planning consultant, we can't take that route anyway. I'm sure we could, but we need to maintain those relationships as respectful, because we want that in return. And I think it's just, it's super important to remember there are people on the other end, and you don't have that control that, you perceive. As you said, we have in code accessible applications in Queensland, if council don't make a decision by the legislative statutory date, we actually can apply for a deemed approval, but then they might put conditions on there that make your life really cruddy.
Well, you don't want that. So work with them and get the outcomes that you're looking for. So that's our 7 biggest mistakes. So just for wrapping that up, it's taking advice from questionable sources, getting emotional, JV partnerships with no head of state, having no development assessment strategy, having no engagement with the community, getting approvals that can't be built, and having unrealistic timing and expectations. So they're our 7. Now, I'm going to throw one as a question without notice, and it's not really a mistake, but it's rather an observation that I would say that council write rules that are very clearly black and white in most instances. This is what you can do and this is what you can't do. But in the end, councils are governed by elected officials who have political agendas. And so from time to time, the interpretation of those rules may flex, for want of a better word. So rather than a mistake, it's about knowing that those things can flex and knowing that in some areas you're, wanting to understand what the political flavour is in the area. If you've got a lot of anti-development people in the area, then the councillor is going to be listening to them because they're voting constituents and they'll be putting pressure on their town planning team. So how much have you seen that, I guess, in your world, more an awareness rather than a mistake?
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of, because I know that people do see it and then they think, well, why can't we, just do this? I saw so-and-so over there, they just got their approval, they didn't comply with that. But then I go, well, what are your connections? What have you done? And I find it really interesting because I always explain to people that town planning is legislative, but also political. It's not just, especially in Queensland, it's very performance-based. So our legislation is written to be performance-based, but then we have accepted outcomes, which are, there you're very clear, must have a 3-meter setback, must be 2 stories high, don't go. But if you don't comply with those, it goes to performance. So where those performance outcomes are, that can be changed depending on the political, flavor of the week, month, year. We saw it a lot before the last elections up here in Queensland. We saw Brisbane, kind of go really hard on things like street trees and townhouses. So they just basically went, it was political because they needed to run a campaign on it. And so that filtered through. Even though the legislation hadn't changed, nothing had changed, but they just started being harder on things and just saying, no, we interpret this particular outcome to not be like that. And then if you want that system to work for you, it's about, again, as you said, understanding who the political decision makers are in your electorate and making a relationship and a connection, engaging with those people and understanding what you can and can't do, what they will accept, what they won't accept, and, just keeping your finger on the pulse.
And which loops all the way back to, I guess, the biggest mistake, number one, is you want to make sure that you're actually engaging with people who are experts in your area. So town planner who's an expert in that area, because they are aware of those political nuances as they flex and change, because they're doing lots and lots and lots of applications in that same area, as opposed to someone who's out of area, doesn't really have those relationships, not dealing with staff, I guess, internally in council, don't have the flex. But yeah, it's more an awareness to say, well, look, at different points in time as you're coming into an election, I guess the interpretation of rules can be, a little tighter. Once the election is over, they tend to relax a little bit more. When there are, political influences in an area, then the politicians tend to listen to the voice of the people a lot. So the voice of the developer doesn't get listened to a hell of a lot, enough I've found. But lots of voters, absolutely lots of voters.
Yeah.
Any last, comments that you want to stick in there about any of those, Jess, before we go to the crowd and
no,
see if there's
I'm happy to go to the crowd. I think we've covered a lot of ground there.
Okay, let me jump out into Facebook world. I tried not to listen to them as they go whizzing past. So let's see.
Hopefully no questions in there about if I missed Ed. I think I was nodding my head a lot at the start of this.
Okay, give me 2 secs. And sorry, my screen is playing up, so I'm having to look at something else at the moment. I'm actually not seeing any questions at all, Jess. This is
good.
Most
all the questions.
Sorry, good, did you say?
I expected to hear no more questions about town planning and mistakes people make. Never again.
Well, I'm sure that hopefully we've set them on the right track so that it's not a biggie anyway moving forward. For anyone who wants to, connect with Jess, you've got Urban Planners Queensland. The short link is upqld.com.au. And your podcast, Jess, what's that called?
Creating Australia. So you can find it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
I just noticed through that whole thing, I had a typo on your name. That's terrible.
Oh, Jessica, the new one.
So I'm gonna fix that just for the viewing public right this very second, just so we can sign off correctly. My humble apologies on that. That's the beauty of going live, right? So, but
Sure, they
we
got
are.
the point.
Jessica, got it. Oh, good. Well, as we can't see any questions there, Jessica, thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic, and I can't wait to catch up with you again in person next time we're out and about.
Yeah, sounds good.
No
Thanks, Rob.
worries. Okay. Bye.
Bye.